All right. So let's talk a little bit about history and the lessons of history. Let's talk about personal development within the context of history and creating a sense of power within a society that's basically a power vacuum. Mm, we live in very egregious times, right? And it's becoming more and more difficult for the average person to, well, self identify, right? And you've probably also been struggling and wrestling with the idea of, well, identity and self identity, right? Um, where am I? What am I supposed to do? Now, let's go back a few ages and let's really look at probably not 100% historically accurate, of course, as you know, we know how history has been relatively manufactured, but still, the basic consensus around it is that it paints a relatively accurate image of the ages as humanity, passed through them. So let's go back a little bit to a small swath of land in northern Germania, or what they would call northern, central, and northern Europe right now. Let's go all the way back in ages and let's look at the tribal congregations, the tribal people who lived there with their own sort of like woodlands type of lifestyle, very environmental lifestyle, and very shamanic in their belief systems, right? Let's look at them and let's not segregate them, and let's call them for the, you know, for the purpose of simplicity, let's call them a congregation of Germanic tribes and Proto-Germanic tribes. Now, this is not to be um, um, mistaken for Germans as we know them today, right? These people are not to be mistaken with the modern German, because the Germanic tribes, meaning tribes that racially at least and culturally as well have a Germanic root. These are the peoples who um, traveled from a place called um, Aryan Scythia, which is just north and to the east of the Caucasus Mountains. Uh, yes, many people don't know this, by the way, and I feel like they should. When they use the word Aryan or where they use the word Scythian or European, they must know where their roots are from. So these are people who migrated from the eastern provinces into Central Europe and then towards Northern Europe. Northern Europe is closer to the shorelines. And as they did so, they established a slightly culturally different lifestyle than the rest of the Germanic tribes, right? Now, if you know geopolitics and geography to a sense, especially back in those days, what we'll call the ancient times, again, for the sake of simplicity, you understand that where you are largely, decides what your lifestyle will be. If you find yourself you know, in the warm southern climate, your lifestyle will probably involve close to no traveling, right? Because everything is in place, everything is being industrialized, and everything is being harnessed straight from, where the populations are set. Now, if you're in, let's say, Central Europe and you sort of like removed from the coastlines and the shorelines, obviously you will be traveling less even more because there is no maritime trade, right? And if you're in the northern provinces, the problem with any sort of northern province is that usually, while it is rich with all kinds of minerals and crystals and oil and so on and so forth. The retrieval of those items is very difficult to harness the land without heavy industrialization. But when it comes to survival and the point of survival being short-term survival, um, these people usually had it far worse, right, than their constituents. Like, let's say you can't grow crops, right? So you're sort of like bound to, herd animals instead and hunt animals instead. Now, what happens when the population grows and you hunt more animals in the vicinity of your populated areas, right? Like the animals migrate, they move, right? Um, Sometimes during winter time, it gets really, really rough. So even in the northern part of Europe, and even like today in Central Europe, in some parts of Central Europe and Northern Europe, like in Slovenia and such, parts of Germany, it gets really cold, like surprisingly cold, right? It freezes over. There's a tendency for those locations to be flooded, oftentimes, so on and so forth. So the understanding is those who have it more difficult will almost always industrialize less, right? So their lifestyle will revolve more around long-term survival, short-term survival, I'm sorry, and not sort of that's like foreshadowing some sort of long-term industrial, lifestyle for their peoples. And so it happened exactly as predicted, just judging the climate and the geography of the areas where these tribes were from. So eventually, someone picks a bone with someone else, and tribal confederacies are created. And these tribal confederacies then fight amongst, one another. And the more industrialized, the more populated, the larger dog wins. Why does the larger dog win at that stage of history? Because the larger dog has fed itself well, right? Its teeth are a little sharper, its claws are a little bit wider, its bones are a little bit more dense. You understand where I'm going with this? So, Central Europe and Southern Europe, when in conflict with the Northern European tribes, right? And you can go back, you know, in ancient time as well, let's say within the context of Romans, you see that exact same scenario play out where the highly industrialized Roman war machine faces off against what they would call the sort of like the barbarian Germanic tribes, which are people known for their relative ferocity, but they aren't the sharpest tools in the shed, so to speak. The Germans find a stringent war path towards the north and then travel all the way up to even Britain back in the day, right? For them, which is the edge of the known civilized world itself. But back to our Germanic tribes, when they are pushed out of their land, right? Where do they go, right? Where do you migrate? Like where do you get away, so to speak, right? All of the nice places, the spots in the sun, so to speak, are taken. So where does such a people go? Well, there is a place, right? Um, there is a place which, albeit deemed the most undesirable place, right? There is a place, and it is relatively empty, right? And it's relatively large and it's very remote. So it's not like your enemies can just come out there and reach you. So they sail to a very unlikely place called Scandinavia, which today is basically possibly the single most comfortable and civilized place in the world to live in. But they travel, these Germanic tribesmen of the olden ages, into a place called Scandinavia, and they establish um, fishing villages, and they established a sort of animal herding lifestyle in there, um, and with less efficiency, again. and their constituents. They've isolated themselves through the blessings of nature and the new geography they found, and they've sort of developed a cultural and biological means to sort of like integrate them in this new harsh sort of like winter climate, right? And they grow and grow and grow, and they don't again industrialize as much, but they grow eventually into a large people, a large confederacy of tribes. Again, now the problem is where they are, right? Like we mentioned before, it's difficult to harness the sort of like the minerals and the blessings of the land without industrialization. These same peoples run out of food. They run out of resource. They just run out of the blessings of life. They have too much of, let's say, animal skins, right? They have too much of that and too little of what the rest of the civilized world has to offer because they can't retrieve it from the land they're on. So what they do is they set out on trading voyages, right? So before we get to the the idea of the Vikings and the idea of what Viking even is, right? They set out on trading voyages. They think to themselves, well, I'm going to go and take this wool, that I have in immense supply. I'm just going to pack it in my little boat, and I'm just going to sail down the Dnieper River or the Volga River or whatever it is, and I'm going to go all the way down into what we would now know as modern day Russian and Ukraine and back to Central Europe as well. I'll go all the way down there to sell my stock, right? And they would establish these sort of like trade routes. And as soon as they'd go down there, they would look at the people who lived in these places, and they were like, "Wow, these people live, really well. They're really well off. They have all these things, and they have this sort of like pleasurable lifestyle. Again, blessed by the land, right? That's why it's called that. Blessed by the land. Mm, and they would go down and sell their stuff, and the moment they would have to go back up, right? They would, buy some of the stuff from, let's say, the Slavic tribes, right? And Slavic tribes, for the most part, they were an agricultural tribe. They were farmers and earth workers, right? Almost all of the Slavic tribes, and they were into paganism, of course. But these weren't a then at that time, these weren't a warrior people, okay? Because they didn't need to be a warrior people. They could just feed off the land and survive that way, no need for conflict, right? So they go back up of the rivers towards Scandinavia. And as they're going up, the air becomes frozen again, sort of like glacial and cold, right? And it's not like they're coming back with a big, how to say, treasury, right, or prize hoard. It's like they've just traded. It's not like they've gained riches, right? They'll have to do the same track again and trade the same stuff again over and over and over. And anyway, as they're going back up, they think to themselves, you know what? That's a nice little village over there. What if we like on our way back just the people are like very docile. They're very peaceful in a sense, right? What if we just raid that village on our way back, burn it to the ground, take all of their riches, and go back to Scandinavia, right? It's not like they can come after us, right? They don't have the sailing capacity nor the will to brave the northern waters like we do, right? So they do that first few times, and then it becomes sort of like a chronic regular thing, right? The idea of Viking, and Viking is not a person or a type of person, which some people seem to think they do. Viking is a pastime. So when you say I am going Viking, it means I am going to conduct trade, and then after the trade is done, I'm going to raid, pillage, conquer, whatever, whatever. And so they basically do this regularly now. And then Viking becomes a thing where you don't even need the pretext of trade. Some people, especially from the lesser developed parts of the Scandinavian sort of like coastline, especially back in that time from places like Denmark. When people think about Vikings, they always think about like Swedes and Norwegians, but it was in fact the Danish who were the first Vikings and had the largest Viking congregations, right? And the most ancient Viking congregations, actually. So, and then the Swedes, and then the Norwegians followed. So these people, these three peoples, they take their little boats, and they go and they pillage and they steal and they take, a whole bunch of treasure back with them, and eventually they reach their ancestral home, um, even in the northern Caucasus, and then they reach the sort of like the northern European shoreline, which is their second ancestral home. Right? They reach these two zones. Um, as soon as they land, again, as they are depicted today with Viking horns or horn helmets, no Viking ever wore a horn helmet. Okay, that's just a comic book depiction. These people did not wear horn helmets. Okay, they're just so like there was a cartoon that depicted them that way as sort of like the northern barbarians or like archetype. No Viking ever wore a horn helmet. Just so you know that. Just so the image in your head is like a little bit different. And most of the peoples who did go Viking, they were in fact not tall at all. They were not thick boned at all, right? They were actually very thin and relatively short, right? Ooh, another thing that breaks people's sort of like imagery of like the Viking archetype, right? Well, why was this so? Because the people who went Viking, right? The people who went to pillage, raid, and conquer, those were people who were lacking basic necessities, right? Basic sustenance, basic food, basic minerals, and so on and so forth. They could not afford to grow 2 meters tall. You understand? And the local rulers, right, within what's it called, Scandinavia, who did not need to, right, who did not need to go, who the very few ones who were not malnutrition, right, they began to experience this power struggle where these um, these peoples within their own clans and tribes, they would go and find incredible notoriety and infamy because now they were the heroes of the land. They would go to these places and they would have these incredible adventures, barely like scrape by, survive, and come back with a bag of gold. That's a very masculine thing to do. So people started looking at these Viking figures as leaders of the new world. They started looking at them as, we want to say it in like a very basic way, they saw them as the alphas, right? At this point. And the people who just like, sat back and did nothing and whatever, whatever, there was this sort of like internal power struggle. Now, if you look at the Germanic genome and especially the northern Scandinavian genome as it later developed, right? When not malnutrition, these are, relatively narrow and thin people, but they're also, quite tall and they can be quite robust, right? So the mixture of those two things, right? Like let's say someone who is, tall but also more skinny like than not, right? That creates a certain type of imagery of sort of in a masculine sense, right? So these Viking, who were not really Viking, um, who were the leaders of the then local clans of the Scandinavian populace, they go, the elites, so to speak, the royals of that place, they go and they're like, well, we're gonna go Viking now too. We have more resources, more food, more things to trade, more people, so on and so forth. And that was the establishment, probably, of the first Viking king, Viking ruler, right? So these big boys, tall, bearded, so on and so forth, they travel down the same river streams. They go through the same sort of like Slavic routes. They go through the same villages and farms and so on and so forth. And they end up in a small place near Crimea in northern Ukraine eventually. And the trade had at this point become so prevalent, right? And the trade routes became so, how to say, difficult to maneuver because there's a lot of opposition now. right? There's a lot of people doing this thing that they thought, why not establish a home ground here? So basically, like a permanent home ground here. So when we go back and forth, right, we have, our own little place to be, so to speak, right? So the people that established this sort of like little isle of Viking glory, right? They were called the Rus, right? These Germanic tribes, Germanic peoples. And in this area, which was then called the Kievan Rus, right? They established their first Viking colony or their trading outpost, right? So the establishment of the Kievan Rus, this is where the proto-Russian everything comes from, and the oldest ancestry of what, let's say, Russia as a nation can claim outside of its Slavic roots, of course, the ancestry of its nationalism and cultural identity, partially, and its ruling elite class all go back to these Viking rulers, the Kievan Rus. Because as they established this place, again, they were the warlike people, and they were welcomed as kings. They ruled this land, right? They said, again, everyone is just a farmer here. They're very docile people. We can just go and take over, right? There's a lot of us here now. We can totally get that done. And they did. I'll tell you that. They did. And then these trade routes were established even further. And the different sort of like warring Viking tribes between the Kievan Rus, which was the first confederation that was created, and then even Russia and Novgorod, right, Moscow and Novgorod, as you see today, those were established later on, right? So the history, the ruling class, and the elite history of these peoples do not coincide with who those peoples are at all. Their elite ruling class have come from a faraway northern land as a warring people, right? So they're of a completely different race. That muddies the waters a little bit when you talk about ancestry and racial tension and cultural identity, right? But the funny thing about that too is these same peoples, these same Viking peoples, right? Again, reach the northern um, European coastline, and then they reach the British Isles, right? But they have immense success everywhere throughout the lands, right? You have Viking kings in being installed or collaborated with in England. You have Viking kings being, collaborated with in Paris, France, which is then probably one of the most industrialized and civilized cities known in the civilized world, right? Now, if it goes so deep, and it goes probably very deep, right? So what I'm trying to explain to you are two things. Why there is this big historical introduction is because I want you to understand the movements of peoples and the inspirations and the motivations of these people. Usually, when it comes to war and military action, those who are inspired the most to survive gain the benefits of rulership. That's usually how it works. So it's a constant contest between the class that has the most resource and then the class, which is not docile, which is not passive, but is inspired to do superhuman feats in order to accomplish power and influence, right? So when that clash happens, when that class-based clash happens, that's where most of the grander historical changes are formed. Now, we're trying to learn two things here. One, there's no such thing as a past colony. If a place is colonized, even once within historical context, that place never stops being colonized. I don't care if you have a revolution. I don't care if you have a new presidency, a legitimate presidency, or kingship, or royal bloodline, or whatever. That place is and always will be a colonized piece of land. If you want to understand modern politics and modern power struggles, which I find that most people don't, and they have an incredibly misconstrued understanding of global politics and what goes on a global scale, because it's a lot to learn. It's a lot of history to know and historical context, and then political analysis. But a general idea is this: if you go to any past colony that, let's say, was held by England. And most people, again, don't know this, but England was once the largest colonist, the largest colonial empire the world had ever known. England, back in the day, in its sort of like, let's say, golden age, basically held the whole world in its grip. The Royal English Navy and the Royal English rulers, right? They were the kings and queens of trade. And it was exactly through trade, right, that was power lined, that was powered by the onset of the Viking raids to their land, which to them was a very sort of desperate and tragic time in history. But the gift it gave them was a pristine understanding of how these people moved, how trade was conducted, why it was important to have a strong navy, so on and so forth. And basically, what they accomplished through doing so is one of the greatest and most ambitious and egregious, colonization efforts known to man. And then we're told through history that at some point these colonization efforts stopped, and the lands that they colonized were then taken back over by the local populace. But that's not how it works, as we saw from the historical example of Moscow and Novgorod and the Kievan Rus, which their royal bloodlines, their elites, right? Um, Even today, right? These nations exist, and their royal bloodlines and their elites exist, and they have nothing to do with the local populace. The very establishment of the country in its current modern form are thanks to these peoples, right? The northern rulers and the northern king. Now, there are Slavic nations and Slavic tribes which are more warring tribes that were not affected by northern Viking rulers, of course. There are these peoples who remained with their own sort of like royal bloodlines, and we can talk about that another day. The Slavs have an incredible ancient history of bloodlines, by themselves as well. But if we're talking about colonization, which I want to emphasize today, just if you want to understand modern politics, you have to understand that there's no such thing as a place that used to be a colony and now is not a colony anymore. It's still colonized. They've just learned how to manage better. I'll tell you why. If you colonize a country or a nation or a people and they're prideful people, well, you're looking at resistance. You're looking at rebellion. So, what's a smart colonizing nation do? It creates the underground empire. It gives you the phone. It gives you, well, this is your new leader, um, dear Arabs. This is Abdullah the third of blah blah blah, third of his name, blah blah blah. But in truth, who does Abdullah serve? Right? He serves the masters. The masters are the ones who control the trade and the economy, and so on and so forth. So these masters remain in the shadows. The people are convinced that they're free. They have no one to rebel against, right? And if they do rebel against someone, the heat is on the current leader, not the controlling party. But then when the new leader is installed, the controlling party, they'll swoop in and they'll be like, well, you know what? This is exactly the amount of um, trade and resource and benefits your country is dependent on our country. If you don't do everything we tell you to do, you're going to lose all of that. And your country is going to go into disrepair. And then your people are going to hang you in the streets, right? So it's very easy. to control the succession of these fake leaders, right, and these fake characters, when you control the influx, import, export of everything, right? Resources, money, military power, so on and so forth. So if you think today that the establishment of power and the how to say balance of power is as so as you see on the geography map, right? When you look at politics, you don't know how wrong you are. What you've learned to see is you've learned to see just like the first layer of the earth, right? And you're looking at it and you're like, well, this is a big country, that's a small country, and it's a smaller country. That's not how it works, guys. It's not how it works, gentlemen and ladies. How it works is that there are conglomerates of different forces that move beyond the idea of national and cultural interest, beyond the idea of national cultural identity, right? So if I ask someone, well, how strong do you think Britain is today, like England? Like, how strong do you think England is? They'll tell me, oh, no, no, not so strong at all. They're like, oh, really? Oh, really? How strong do you think France is today? Another incredibly strong, colonizing country. Oh, not so much. Do you know that Britain and France together, they hold up about, I don't know, like probably up to like 80, 90% of the Earth's whole gold reserve? You know that? Like France can live through 150 revolutions if you just completely break down the country. They have enough gold to rebuild it again probably 150 times, right? Now, the only thing upsetting that balance could be pure militaristic action, meaning technological advancement and industrialization, where some countries have sort of like a grip on, new technology that can sort of like change the power dynamic. But for the most part, people think that the countries that are actually very, very strong and have incredible underground ties and influences and so on and so forth, they think them weak. And the countries that have a strong military presence, they think them strong. But you can't go through a populace through military intervention. That is like the slowest, the most costly, right? Way of conducting business and trade. And this is exactly what they're doing. They're conducting business and trade. And if you look at law, even, right? There's such a thing in the US that they have it, for example, in Britain, I believe, too, as well, called maritime law. Maritime means on the sea, on the waters. That's just how much of a big deal this trade is. So humor me with this, okay? What if, what if you actually have no idea of who's truly holding the power? What if you think you have an idea of who's holding power, but you don't really actually know? Because you don't. Because I'll tell you right now, without pointing any fingers, there are whole countries that are established through clever trade and underground black market means. Whole countries that are established as colonist wings of whole other countries that do not culturally and in an national identity sense relate to each other at fucking all. What if I told you that was so? What if I told you that there are people with so much resource pulling so many strings that they can establish a whole new national entity and identity being completely unrelated to the local populace, but in full and firm control of their political goals, their political agendas, so on and so forth. So imagine if you built a robot, right? You built a robot and you paint it in the colors of the police force. But the agenda of the robot is to kill as many officers and cops as it can, right? Like that's the degree of the paint job, right? That I'm trying to show you. And I want to give you examples, historical, empirically provable examples of how that has occurred several times over the ages, right? All the way back, even in Sumeria and Egypt, the ruling class is not of the local populace. The ruling class is a highly advanced, militaristic, or technocratic peoples that invades, right? And then pervade within the ruling class of the local populace. That's how the power struggle happens. So today you have all these countries and you have all these people coming out and say, well, it's them, it's like they're like the final boss of everything. They're not. They're not. They're not even close. Because you have to look, even the puppet master has strings, right? And the master of the puppet master, even that has strings of its own, right? But what it is all tied to, what it is all tied to, right, is to those who own the most resource. If you want to understand modern politics and modern geopolitics, then you have to look at it from a lens of who holds the most. Who has the most bargaining chips? Why? Because the element of inspiration, right? Due to our technological advancement and general industrialization has halted to to like a party level, a personal level. It's no longer on a cultural level where a culture feels inspired to rise up and increase its prevalence, right, upon the land or something like that. So right now, all that is left is who is holding the cards. And if you really study the economical side of the economy side of this whole thing, you'll realize that the people you think are holding the cards are not holding the cards at all. You'll realize that there's only a few card holders, and there's one that holds the cards above everyone else, right? With their own agendas and da da da. Like we can talk about what they want and why they want it and whatever as much as we want, but the fact of the matter is, like if you ask an American, right? If you ask an average American, like, do you live in like the most powerful country on the planet? And they'll say, yeah, of course we have the most powerful military. But they don't live in the most powerful country on the planet. Hell no, not even close. Hell no. America has debt. America has so much debt, in fact, right? That it is unable to sustain itself without significant economic reset, right? It has to go through the ups and downs and sort of like the crescendo of the times to even allow for its existence. Yes, you have a powerful military force, but it is the lobbying group that allows for the existence and the maintenance of that military force, in truth, that finds leadership. And if you think that those are part of the local populace, you haven't been looking. Because where did those people come from? The people who are in the United States right now as we know it today, where did those people come from? Oh, they were colonizers too, right? So when they came and colonized, what backbone did they colonize with? Who gave them the ships? Who gave them the means? Who gave them the people? Who gave them the right? Who gave them the law? Was the lands that they came from. So if you look at America, America isn't even a country, it's a battlefield, right? It's a military entity that, as a country in a financial sense, doesn't actually hold much sway. And I know that's ridiculous for some people to hear, but it's true. Okay. And then there are other countries, whole other countries, who were formed by a variety of lobbyists, right? And when I say lobbyists, I don't mean like a private person, I mean like a whole congregation. Right? And the underground systems that were put in place, and how you find these underground systems today in modern form, there's two wings. One is the trade wing, right? The the economy, who holds the most resource. And two, they're not the secret societies. Those are just like the funny paper. Those are the funny layers. They're the agencies. So the real ruling class of the modern world and the modern geopolitical arena are the maritime traders and the agencies. And if you see today anyone with influence or power or some sort of like part of some sort of power struggle or inner power struggle is one way or another a part of this web, right? They're associated with this agency or that agency, or they're a lobbyist for this group or that group. So the interests of a nation, the immediate short-term interests of a nation are actually the interests of its populace, not its ruling class. And now once you've understood this, now you're in like the first grade of actual history and geopolitics, right? Once you've understood this basic idea of how the world functions, you have to detach yourself from the traditional idea of like this country has that interest and that country has this interest. You need to throw the borders away. And if you truly want to understand what's going on around you, you have to look at those two particular things. Again, one of which is economy and trade and who holds resource, not where most resource is directed, but who holds the resource. And then the second one, not the military presence. The military can be bought by anyone, by any lobbying group. Any lobbying group can buy themselves a whole military today. They can buy a fake nation or form a fake nation or country through which they can use to conduct all of these different military operations. That's not impressive to these people, right? The second is the war of information, the web of information. And information, right? Like let's say if you're a president of the United States, did you know that if you ask for I want information about aliens. Let's see everything we have on aliens. The agencies have a right. what they tell you as for your own protection, for your own security, they have a right to deny you access to 99% of all of their documentation about it. So even the highest ranking military commander, or that's what it's supposed to be, such, right? Being the president of the United States, knows very little. They don't have access to the information. Why? Because they don't have to. They don't need to know the information because they're not really the ones in power. Those in the power have the resource and the information. So yeah, shadow empires. That's what decides the geopolitics everywhere now. In the Russia and in the eastern side, there's the KGB and the wing of the KGB, right? In the West, you all know who those are. I don't have to mention them by name. In the Middle East, right? That's where the real borders happen, right? And if you want to answer the question of like who's behind it all, it's not who you think it is, right? Well, I mean, it is who you think it is. It is in so many ways, right? But they're not the it's not the head of the snake you're looking at, right? It's just its sticky little fingers popping out of the popping out of the ground. That's what you're really looking at, right? So that's why today, nowadays, it's a little bit ridiculous to identify with the interests of a political party or a nation, because nations stopped existing a very long time ago. The web of nations, right? If you look at the borders of the earth, like they look like a giant web. The web of nations exist for us. That's why they exist. Nations stopped existing a very long time ago, my friends. 500, 600 years. There were some nations that were created within that time frame. So you can tell me, well, Uncle Jack, what do you mean? Like this nation was created like 100 and whatever. Exactly. What makes a nation a nation? The cultural and traditional inheritance of the collective peoples that inhabit it, right? And here I am telling you now that nations no longer exist. You have to stop looking at politics from a lens of, well, this nation, that nation, they don't exist. What does exist is the informational war and the interest war, the financial war. Those are the two things that exist. So yeah, are you what like um you're what like oh I'm American, oh I'm French. No, you're not. Like culturally and traditionally, you are, of course, but you're not really. You're really really not. What you are is at least how you're viewed as a thing that eats food and has desires and yeah. You need to reinvent yourself. You can't identify with your country. You can't identify with a political party, for example, that is a false, that it's created straight from the root as a false for you to have something to identify with. Oh, I'm an American Republican, blah, 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 blah. No, you're not. All of those things are fake. You can't be part of a fake country, of a fake political movement with fake agendas that are not real agendas. You can't be. And it's time to wake up from that little slumber, right? That little dream. I know people find personal identity and a form of like personal strength from identifying with certain things and movements with peoples because they haven't found their spiritual whole, right? They haven't found their sense of belonging. Because in the past you could associate with this or that ruler or this or that, you know, king or this or that whatever, and you could have a adventurous life and you could have a wonderful journey, right? That you could tell your children and grandchildren about. But right now you feel lost because at the end of the day your existence largely doesn't matter for both of these. You understand? And that's why people feel like there's so much going on and they're just missing out on everything, right? There's this growing sort of like global sentiment, right? Especially people who are like well informed of like the modern happenings and stuff like that, and people who are on the internet a lot. There's this growing sentiment, right? And the growing sentiment is that nothing ever happens. Nothing ever happens, man. Nothing ever happens. Nothing ever happens is because you can't see it happening. Why would you, some random person, be invited to see the real handshakes and the real happenings of the world going behind the scenes, right? That's why people are lost. They feel like the adventure is dead. They can't actually do anything to impress their will upon modern society or today's world. You can't do anything. Like even if you make $100 million, right? The powers that be are so that your money and whatever you purchase with that money is never truly really yours. You can have it taken away from you, boom, like that, with the flick of a finger. Your bank account is closed, right? We've taken all of your ownerships of everything. You no longer own these things that you thought you owned. So the days of discovering a beautiful waterfall and then claiming it for your own and then constructing a little village around it and defensive walls around it are over, my friends. We live in an age where you are owned. You cannot own. You are given the right to temporarily inhabit and own. The only thing you own is yourself. You don't own any house that you bought. You don't own any money that you have in the bank. You don't even own the money that's under your pillow because someone can just decide, just like that, boom, new legislation, that money is useless now. They can just say, well, the economy fell out. Your money is worth 10,000 times less now than it does. In some countries, that has happened before, by the way. The currency fell so hard that it wasn't worth anything anymore. The people who thought they were rich were suddenly not. They were poor. So understand that money and money making and your attachment to these objects, right? To material wealth, you're just increasing and enhancing the means through which you can be controlled. That's why the web, this web, right, is so incredibly potent. And it's incredibly potent against people who are dependent on that web, right? On the web of money, on the web of material wealth, and on the web of information. So there are truly two currencies that exist in the world today. One is information, and the other is real, tangible resource. So not fake money, but the thing that money is based on the thing that money is derived from. Those are the two real currencies. Really think on that before you discuss politics, because I see like a lot of people they discuss politics and like they have this such a gullible, naive view of the world, right? They look at it and think, well, like Azerbaijan has this interest because it wants the oil pipe to go. My friend, if the powers that be needed the oil pipe to be there, the oil pipe will be there, no matter what. It'll be there. See, there's never but the countries. The countries, the Grand Theater, that's just for show. That's just for, Betsy and Paul who want to live in their complete ignorance, who just want to be, you know, what they would call like the average person, the useless eater, right? They want to remain on layer one of reality, lying to themselves and keeping ignorant about the nature of the the human world that we've built, the nature of civilization that we've built, right? The idea is that it goes far deeper than you think it does. That's the general idea. And you have had several historical examples where, again, the ruling class has nothing to do genetically, culturally, with the local populace at all. At all. Most of the elites and the royals that were established in these great empires, like they weren't wearing the suits and on the stage and waving hands as president or first lady or whatever. No, 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 no. Why would they ever do that? Why would they put themselves in the spot? If you know who rules you, you can go and like slay him. But if you think you know who rules you, then they don't care. It's just a pawn. They can like bring in the next one and bring in the next one and bring in the next one. I always say if you know their name and if you know their face, they're just a you know, they're just a peon. Like in the grand scheme of things, right? There's a lot you can know from a person's name, and we all know that there's an incredible amount of things you can know from a person's face. So if their face is known and if their name and ancestry and origin is known, they're not a big time player. And I know that's difficult to believe because like the discrepancy between like the average person and someone who's like ultra super rich and powerful is so grand. But in the grand scheme of things, those people are small, right? Those people are actually really, really small. So please, like, learn these two things. If you want to be taken seriously when discussing politics, just learn two things. Um, One, learn that there's no such thing as layer one. There's no such thing as countries and nations each struggling like valiantly for their own. There's no such thing. There's only a few players, and in truth, on the chessboard, there's always two players. There's only two players in the grander scheme of things. But there was only a few players that can really move the figures. There's no such thing. Nations stopped existing a long time ago, right? Really learn that, please, before you go and like, oh, so it's like, oh, it's this people and that people and those. Don't look for the people. Look for the interests, because there will always be people who will worship degenerate ideas. There will always be people who will worship great ideas. But it doesn't mean that any of these people truly hold in their hands the means to influence the board. But the problem is when the control grid breaks down, when things like money and information don't matter as much, right? That's when you see the truth seeping out. And that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing the truth of who really rules you seeping out today. You're seeing the truth of, wait a second, huh? Okay. These countries that I thought were like really powerful aren't actually that powerful at all. These people that I thought could make big decisions can't make any decisions at all. This is universal, not in one particular nation or country. This is universally true. So again, before you discuss politics, understand this very simple thing. It's crazy when you think about it in that sense, right? But even like the symptom of that, you'll travel to any like Central European country, they all look the fucking same now. What they're trying to do is they're trying to take away the cultural identity as well. At least in the past, like they had class and taste, and they kept the cultural identity of the place intact, right? If you visited Paris in France, you would be in Paris, France. Ah, I'm in Paris, France. So amazing. If you visit some other country, they oh, I'm in, like I'm in Rome, I'm in Greece. Now what they want is that they want to homogenize like everything, right? So they want to like they want everything to look the same. It's a degenerate thing. Before you discuss politics, please understand these two things. It's so simple, right? And I keep repeating the same thing because I really need you to learn how to look at things if you uh, hope to look through them, right? That's why we're here, right? You want to gain a better understanding of truth, of where you are, and and geopolitics is a large part of that. But first, you have to understand like how those things happen. I don't have to wear a crown to rule you. Don't be naive. Don't be like a child reading a children's book. It's not the person wearing the crown that always rules the kingdom. You know that's true. You know that's true. Real power, real power is concentrated in who holds the resource. Okay? I don't care if you have the bloodline of kings. If we're in an elevator and I'm holding the gun, I have all the power in that room. You have no sway over anything. That's just true. The only other person who might have a sway is the person who holds information. So you always have those two things clashing. And then you have, like we said, the class divide clashing, which is the people in the populace who feel inspired to great action against the people who hold the most resource. But the problem is today, even if you become inspired by great action, you're very limited because you can be traced, you can be tracked, you can be, whatever. You're living under such brutal law, right? Like systems of law and systems of like banking and money and so on. You don't even realize how fucked you are, is what I'm trying to say, right? Like I don't mean to be like a doomer about it, but like um it's really difficult today to find any sort of freedom and liberation and grace on that level of politics. This is why I always preach personal liberation and still living within the system, because you can't go against the system. You can't go and fight against an unseen enemy because the unseen enemy has so much resource, so much more resource than you think they do, right? The only thing that you can do as a human being today, if you want to truly get out of this idiotic play, right, is to be smart and intellectual and wise, because this is something that humans universally respect. And then what you want to do is you need to learn how to maneuver the space, like on a personal level. You need to learn how to maneuver your slavery, so to speak, right? And you have to stop playing along. And if enough people stop playing along and playing around with the charades, eventually the real power struggle will come to the surface. And you will all see then, oh, so I guess this is the real power struggle. It's not between countries, it's not between nations, it's not between races, right? It's between interest and resource, and between information. And this could be any sort of information. It could be occult information. It could be technological advancement, all kinds of information, right? That's why the two most financed portions of, well, basically anything, well, one the portion that is lobbied for the most is the political arena, and then there are the agencies, right? And I can't even imagine the technology and the control these entities can exert nowadays. They're probably so far ahead of what where we feel they are, that it's scary. If you're not a man of God, it's something scary, right? Like if you're not a man of faith, it's something that's terrifying, right? It's something that's not even worth talking about, because like you basically low key be fear mongering, right? But again, if you are a man of faith, if you are a man of God, you see that all of these systems, all of this chaos, all of the dust that's sort of like flying through the air, all of it is designed to settle in a way where the truth prevails, right? Not for everyone, not for everyone, for the chosen few. The truth is not for everyone, because not everyone can take the truth. Well, firstly, not everyone can comprehend the complexity and the depth of the truth, but then not everyone can take the truth on a psychological level, on a mental level, on a like a sanity level, right? So the truth is reserved for the few, and eventually it'll come out. But this is a fallen world. Make no mistake. I will never like lie to people and tell them, well, this world is actually like, human. This is a fallen world. Most people are slaves to money, to desire, to their, you know, base primal instincts and impulses. They're informational slaves, they're political slaves, they're ideological slaves. And the only person who can walk out of this place alive in a spiritual sense is the one who firstly learns to accept it, and then to maneuver it with wisdom, and then after all those things, to gently changing it. Like I said, like, you can't change the political status quo. We can't go out and make a party and do something about it. You can't create a military organization and hope to fight anything that way, because you'd just be becoming what you're trying to fight. What you can do is you can live out your life with grace, and you can have faith. And like I said, you want to hit a very small target, an infinitely small target within a pool of infinite possibilities, right? Why do we say that? What enables you to hit that sort of small target? It's your ability to funnel your willpower into your intuitive senses, into your intuition, and then follow that intuition, no matter where it leads you, no matter how ridiculous or fantastical it might be, to follow that intuition, because it's leading you to where you need to go for your to find your personal liberation, right? And sometimes you'll be confused, other times you'll be, I don't know, belittled or violated against or whatever, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that you follow it. That's what matters. Um, the moment you start to fight, it's already lost, because now you're grounding yourself in the material battlefield, and the material battlefield is owned by these, like incredibly, immensely powerful entities that you cannot even hope to go toe to toe with, right? But that's why we call it the art of quiet living, because the rebellion, the victory, the the spiritual bliss that happens within. And the only thing, the one thing, right? The one thing no materialist ever has access to, right? So they have no information about it. They can't trade with it. They can't buy it. They can't threaten it. Is higher wisdom, higher knowledge in God. Because higher wisdom comes to those who are worthy, not those who have the resource to buy it, not those who have the means to informationally collect it. It comes to those who are worthy of it, who become worthy of it in this fallen world. And the funny part of it is, if it does come to you, and if it does protect you, and if it does lead you to where you need to go, you can choose to keep it all for yourself. You don't have to tell anyone. It's all in your mind. You have the cheat code to maneuver this world, to maneuver this life fearlessly when there's so much to fear, where everyone is infinitely more powerful than you. Even if you feel like you're the most powerful person in the world, there's probably something more powerful than you that can slay you. But if you can manage to become worthy, right, in this test, then you might just hold something that none of these people can. That's why when we say it's an informational war, people who are engaged in this informational war, they can't really get information on higher truths and higher wisdom. That's why they're always, out there making things up or grifting or collecting like um, experiences from like secondhand experiences from people who have actually gone through these things, right? Because if you work in any of these entities, then you have to be a ruthless materialist. You can't possibly work in any of these places if you're not a ruthless materialist. You understand what I'm saying? The moment you grow a conscience is the moment you can't work in these places anymore. You can't decide. The moment you grow spirituality and you know real compassion and empathy and awakening, you can't possibly relate yourself to these places. So yes, these people have some sort of occult hidden information, but usually 99% of the times this is information that comes from the lower planes. This is dark corrupting because that's the only esoteric knowledge they will ever have access to. Because a person whose goal is to find influence and power will never become worthy of true higher wisdom. This is why those people believe that um if magic did exist, then it would have to be dark magic. There's no such thing as white magic, as white sorcery, because they've never experienced it. They're babies, they're children, like in a spiritual sense they are. But they're also in this world, in the physical plane, they're very dangerous. They're dangerous people because they hold a lot of power and influence. So there's only one secret society in this world, and that is the Society of God. It is the only successful secret society on this planet because you can hold the secret of God in your heart, and you don't have to like shake hands with anyone, talk to anyone about it, meet anyone about it, right? It is the only secret that can survive the times. And if you move with God, and when I say God, I mean the lesser God within you. If you move with your intuition to drive you, if you move with your conscience to stop you, right? when needed. If you move with your ambition to inspire you, if you move with your desire to understand your base nature, right? And if all these four forces interweave, right? Like if you when you follow your ambitions, at some point your intuition might tell you, "Hey, don't go right, go left." Great. If you follow that intuition, then and you follow your desires, let's say your sexual desires, right? And then your conscience will tell you, don't do that. Maybe we'll, hurt someone. Or maybe we'll break someone's heart if we do that, right? And you follow that, and you follow the compass given to you by God, right? You'll eventually end up in a place of momentum, right? And then that momentum will lead you in strange places, right? Those are the missions that you get, right? That's how you get your mission. So there's no better secret agent than the secret agent of God, right? As long as you learn how to listen and how to maneuver this very dark and fallen world. Okay, I'm not going to rant on more about this, but really think about it, okay? Remember, politics don't exist, nations don't exist. It's all one big theater. None of these things exist. There's the people who live on the earth, and then there are interests. There's the informational war and the financial war. There's no such thing as a past colony. Remember that. If a place was colonized, it's colonized even today, most likely. And it's serving the interests of the colonizers, of the last colonizer, right? Remember that. Regardless of how much money you make, you're still enslaved. Regardless of how safe you think you are and how influential and powerful you are, there will always be someone more influential and more powerful than you. And the only thing these people have no access to is your awakening, your relationship with God.